Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Dan Malouf, Senior Director of Product here at Irons. Excited to be hosting this week's tech briefing. Quick refresher, the purpose of these 30-minute briefings is for our rotating cast of Irons faculty members to dive into the relevant InfoSec news stories of the week and provide specific actionable guidance to take back to your teams. With that as a backdrop, thrilled to be joined today by two Irons faculty rock stars, Wolf Gorlick and Dave Shackelford. Wolf is an advisory CISO with prior experience leading IT and IT security in the healthcare and financial services verticals, plus a background in leading consulting and assessment practices. And Dave is the founder and principal consultant with Voodoo Security, an information security consulting firm. So Wolf and Dave, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's look at the agenda here today. We're going to talk some more Snowflake. So we did an exec comms briefing yesterday. We got the incident command center up and running for Snowflake. Let's dive a little bit more into the weeds on that from a technical standpoint. I know there's a lot of uncertainty there, so we'll sort of break through that ceiling a little bit. After that, we're going to talk a recent Microsoft warning that hackers are targeting internet-exposed OT devices. And finally, we'll dive into an interesting story actually last week about a 2023 incident in which thousands of home routers across the US got bricked by a malicious firmware update. Very interesting, mysterious, what's going on here kind of story. So excited to get to that one too. So yeah, obviously a lot of ground to cover today. Dave, I'm going to start with you if I can. You did the write-up for us this week. Do you want to give us kind of the first thoughts on Snowflake? What's kind of going on here? What's the latest? What's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, everybody's talking about this because we should be. It's okay. So I have mixed thoughts on this, and I know Wolf has thoughts as well. But the whole concept of this Snowflake breach compromise situation is sort of in flux right now. So I feel like we're going to continue to be talking about the Snowflake breach scenarios and sort of the fallout of that for a while to come yet. But like what's happening now overall. So I mean, a bunch of people that are using Snowflake, which it turns out is huge organizations all over the place, right? It's storage and analytics. It's massive scale data processing. I mean, it's massive companies, right? It's some of you that are hanging out with us here today. I know this, you know this, we know this. The challenge is that Snowflake got breached, right? Got compromised in some way, shape, or form. And I'll come back to that in a second. And that there's sort of the mysterious aspect of this. And there's been a number of Snowflake customers that have been breached very recently. I mean, the biggest one that everybody keeps talking about, like at the moment, is Ticketmaster, but it's a threat actor group, right? I mean, and truthfully, I hate this threat actor group just because I think they have a stupid name, right? Shiny Hunters. I mean, okay, maybe it's clever, maybe it's not, but they're saying, hey, look, we've got over 500 million Ticketmaster customers' personal data. They've got other companies in there as well, Santander, like some other companies that are, pretty big organizations. And they're saying, hey, look, we got in here because we had access to the Snowflake environment through a compromised employee account. That's where things get weird because Snowflake themselves are coming back and saying, no, yes, we had a compromised account, but it was only access to a demo environment with no sensitive data. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect, right? There's some discord there as to whether or not that was the impetus to get in. They're claiming, and they've got, the likes of Mandiant and CrowdStrike and others chiming in on this saying, hey, look, the way that people are getting breached in Snowflake environments, we're a SaaS company. It's people that aren't doing a good job of protecting their own environments, in particular, without having multi-factor authentication enabled. So what we've got here is a handful of disparate statements, one from the threat actors saying, no, this is the way that we got in. And the other coming from Snowflake themselves with some fairly reputable organizations in alignment with them, arguing, no, like we basically, we didn't get compromised, they got compromised. So therein lies the crux. We're going to see more Snowflake breaches, whether they're Snowflake breaches that derive from an internal compromise of Snowflake, or whether they're just people not doing a great job of securing their own environments within the Snowflake infrastructure. I think that has yet to be determined, but the fallout, the actual impact is massive. I mean, the Ticketmaster situation alone, right? I mean, so I'm in there, right? I mean, like, I mean, we're going to see a lot of massive scale impact coming out of this, but it's an interesting one for a lot of reasons. I think at the beginning of it, it's just, hey, look, um, we don't really know the ultimate root cause. I think there's a lot of speculation that's going on. So I'm gonna let Wolf chime in on this one because he's probably got some thoughts on this thing too.
Yeah, I got some thoughts on what it means for us as an industry and a community, and what it means for us as security leaders. On the
Mm-hmm.
industry community side, in Q&A, pulls out something I was going to mention, which was we've got the situation now with the 8Ks where there needs to be immediate reporting. And what that the pros to that is there's immediate eyes on things, there's immediate investigation on things. The cons is anyone who's ever done incident response, anyone who's ever, fought these fires realizes that you're going to be reporting well before you really know what's going on. And these situations will be emerging and changing very quickly. So Ticketmaster says, hey, it's Snowflake. Snowflake says, oh, maybe it's us. Snowflake lists some 800 or some 80 suspicious IP addresses. Today, that number is over 240. And then Snowflake brings in the big guns to look at it and said, it wasn't us. Now, who's right? We don't really know yet, but I think from a industry and community perspective, we are shifting into this area where we are going to be getting intel early, which is good, but it's going to be incomplete, which is not good. It's going to be emerging, and we're going to have to be really ready to shift. So if you're a security leader and you're like, oh, by the way, Ticketmaster just got compromised because of Snowflake. We need to do something. And that's on Monday. And then on Wednesday, you're like, yeah, it wasn't really Snowflake. You stand the chance of losing the respect of your internal leadership. So the way we message and think about breaches, I think, is also going to change.
Interesting. Pablo, I like Pablo's comment here. The Godzilla version of SolarWinds. Dave, what were you going to say? Go for
The Godzilla version. I can't imagine that's a good thing, right? Calling something the Godzilla version of anything, right? Like just, just stomp on the city, I guess. But what I thought of, actually, while Wolf was just talking, I was thinking about that classic Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at one another, right? And I'm thinking like, well, who's to blame? I actually think Wolf just nailed it. There's definitive takeaways here for security leadership and security ops, for that matter. You should go look through your potential, EDR. You should look through the logs. You should get the SOC involved. I mean, all those indicators of compromise, even static as they may be, you should go check them out. I mean, if you've got like lots of communication that you've never seen before coming to or from that IP address, you should probably ratchet it up a little bit in terms of prioritization. But I think the bigger point is, and I love the whole sort of 8K filing, there's such pressure on security leadership to, sort of understand and be confident in their statement with regards to materiality and impact. But how can you be without really knowing exactly what's going on for some period of time? And so I think there's got to be almost this wait and see model. My gut tells me that, between the SECs and the CISAs and these various, groups and government organizations that are starting to dictate how we resolve these things and make sure that they're disclosed appropriately, there's probably going to be some reckoning with regards to that sort of wait and see, time period. Because I think there is a lot of, widely disparate information that's being thrown around out here. I mean, it's a breach. Look, everybody, it's a breach. We get it. Everybody understands that. It's related to Snowflake. We get that. But where and how that is occurring, I think there's a lot of speculative sort of discussion going on right now.
In addition to that, taking it down one click, this reminds me of MoveIt. This reminds me of Log4j. This reminds me of a lot of things. As a muscle, if you, as a security organization, cannot say, I heard this was potentially breached, do we have it in our environment? Is our developers using? Is our products using it? Do we have it in our vendor ecosystem? Is it part of our vendor supply chain? If answering those questions takes days and days and days, or is unclear or impossible, we're in a really bad spot, right? This really does remind me of the importance of the third-party risk management, of inventory management, of good composition analysis, possibly if you're building things with things like SBOM, but that's a whole other conversation. The ability to say, hey, I heard possibly there's an issue with Snowflake. Where is it in our environment or supply chain? You should be able to answer that within a relatively quick period of time. And I know a lot of folks are struggling with that right now.
I'll just chime in on what you said. So they are, but so I'm a closet optimist in the space. I'm working through it. The therapy's helping, but yeah, I think people are getting better at it because I think we're realizing that there's this interconnectedness across the organizations that we talk to all the time. Nobody has, nobody's an island. I mean, everybody has third parties. Everybody's got this, I think higher degree of interconnectedness than ever before due to cloud predominantly. People are really paying attention to it. Executives are paying attention to it. Stakeholders all over the place are looking at this and saying, look, if you can't tell me what you have and who's running it and how it's connected to you and what kinds of data are involved there, you're not doing a great job. And so I think we'll see this get better. But, today, here, 2024, there probably are a lot of organizations out there going, do we have Snowflake?
Right.
Yeah, and it's not just do we have them, but do our vendors, right? So there's a whole lot of that going on right now. Any other sort of you're asking that question, do we have Snowflake, do our vendors? What are kind of next steps there or other steps you should be taking in in addition to that? Anything around MFA or any other kind of tactical things you should be doing?
I'd be remiss if I didn't hit the MFA drum at least once every time I'm on these calls. So absolutely, we need multi-factor in place. We know that can be bypassed. There's a whole bunch of different conversations we have about that. But, oh my goodness, please don't have a password with no multi-factor. Also, one of the things that's interesting about this is it looks like the access was through perhaps a service account or a ServiceNow account, which again gets to the conversation of non-human identities, right? We've made progress in securing human identities. We made progress in having stronger authentication, having different methods, using conditional access, all those sort of things. However, all that oftentimes gets bypassed if we're doing a service account or non-human account. So the attack vector across the service account side is an area that definitely needs to be explored and enhanced. So yes, please use multi-factor. Also, please do consider your non-human accounts. I know, Dave, why am I still saying this? I feel like I've been saying this for 20 years, but
I was just going to let you say it. I was like, I know he's going to say it at some point, so I'll just hang back. I'll wait. The right moment will sort of, make itself obvious. But before we move on, we should just make sure we hit the comments that came in here. So Drew made a great comment about Jake's comment from the briefing that was yesterday. And I think that's fair. We're talking materiality. I don't think we want to go too far down that rabbit hole just because of time. But I think, candidly, materiality has to be informed by the CISO and the security organization. But the decision as to what the ultimate output of that is, that's not the CISO's job. That needs to be finance. That needs to be legal. That needs to be executive level. With again some inputs, and I think any security leader would readily give you a thumbs up on that. But you better be ready to say, hey, this is what we think it's going to mean impact wise. The anonymous attendee, whoever the anonymous attendee is, it says, hey, how do you keep track of each vendor's tech stack? I'm going to chalk that, and I think Dan will probably agree. That's a bigger conversation than we can have here in the time we've got, but it's a good one. It's a good question to ask. It's an important one to ask, but you're talking SBOMs, you're talking third-party risk management, and we'll have to probably table that one, I think.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions on that. If you do want more on that, obviously, use the Ask an Expert service. Last one, just before we move on, if either of you wants to take it, best way to secure local Snowflake service accounts if we can't use MFA on them besides long passwords and allow listing IP spaces.
Wolf.
Long passwords allow IP address spaces. I need to go back and check, but I also think there's ability to do cert-based authentication, which would be my preference. But don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I configured that. So I would look at what additional stronger authentication mechanisms are available.
Cool.
Agreed.
Awesome. All right. Well, certainly more to come on that. As a reminder, we do have the command center up. So if you have additional questions, toss them in the discussion there. Dave and Wolf have access to that. They can, respond to questions as they come up. So we'll definitely hear more on that. So yeah, let's move to topic 2. Wolf, you want to take the first crack at this story about internet exposed OT devices and Microsoft's new warning on those?
Yeah, I feel like the only thing that I've been saying longer than please enable multi-factor is please get your OT devices off the internet. To be honest. Now, granted, there's still cases where, and they're very rare and few and far between, where that may be necessary. There's still plenty of data coming out of the internet scanners, census, Shodan, et cetera, that show how many OT devices are out there. So we know this is still an issue. It doesn't need to be an issue. We need to move these devices behind. But what is happening now, and is happening for a while, but Microsoft has additional guidance about a particular instance on this, is that people who are hacktivists, people who are hacking for political reasons, are finding these devices, are exploiting these devices, and are causing issues for creating a splash, both metaphorically, hey, look, we've compromised you, we're in support of this country or against that country, or literally a splash in the case that Microsoft details that you can see in the write-up, where they're going after some of the water supply. So it's a story that is difficult to read because we know we've got a very broad set of infrastructure that is very susceptible to these types of attacks, and the fix is seemingly not that hard. Move it behind a firewall, segment it, use good security principles, apply the Purdue model or whatever your OT security model of choice is. But yeah, just again, OT devices in the news, and water supply in the news.
So it's funny. I mean, yeah, I always love hanging out with Wolf on these because I'm like, there's gonna be a mention of MFA for every one of these things, like because it's true, right? And it just is. But I'm going to give you some support for that, Wolf, because one of my friends, fellow SANS instructor, has dedicated his entire career to trying to help people secure some of this OT stuff. And I remember distinctly, the context doesn't inherently matter, but I remember distinctly years and years ago when he founded the company. And it was early on in that space and so forth. And he and I, and actually my wife, we were actually on the way to a holiday party. Not that matters, like I said, contextually, but I just said, hey, so like all this stuff you hear about OT, like what's the big problems? And he said, like, look, you can't always patch this stuff. Everybody kind of knows that. But he said, I could solve everybody's problems, or at least 90% of them, if they would just get it off the internet or put it behind some sort of proxying mechanism that required MFA. There we go. Like a lot of those things go away if those things are done. And it always stuck with me. I'm like, well, that sounds like drastically simple. And so I always look at these things that like what Microsoft is suggesting here. And I think to myself, hey, if let's go back, number one, to organizations that don't know what they have. I think we could take that and just sort of roll it forward. Do you know you have OT? But number two, if you even think you might have OT, why do you not have a Shodan subscription? And why aren't you going and actively and proactively looking for the presence of said OT on the internet? Because a lot of those teams that are like engineering and manufacturing have very little sort of interrelationship or affinity with those security teams. Go find it yourselves and track it down, right? At least inform yourself as to what's sitting out there. And then you can start down the path of remediating this and doing something about it, I think.
Now, in a former life, I was doing a lot of OT work for the food industry, and this was the time I was running an apprenticeship, and so we built this like OT lab and this OT CTF, and it was a lot of fun. But it was so easy to have these things fall over because you send the wrong packet, or you send a default password, it's game over. Now, why would it be on the internet? I don't want to make it sound like, oh, segmenting everything within a factory line or factory environment is simple, but segmenting out the internet should be simple. Now, why is it on the internet? I would probably bet that someone needed to do maintenance. Some vendor told them they had to do this. And they're like, oh, okay, and they put in a ticket. Oh, can you open up this IP address for this port? And away they go. Years and years ago, I ran into a power plant that they'd done this for over Telnet so that their people could work from home. If you have OT, yes, find it, discover it. If you have OT and you have a remote management use case, you have people need to do maintenance, you have people need to work at it from home, all those sort of things. This is where the vendor privileged access management space really comes in handy, like your CyberArk, your BeyondTrust, your Delinias, some of the startups like Ciolo. There's an entire marketplace where you can put it behind a firewall, put it behind a proxy, enable multi-factor, do everything you just mentioned, Dave, and allow that access from a third party over a secure tunnel or over a remote browser isolation instance. So if there is that environment and you need that, that's the space that you really need to look at and get these guys behind a firewall.
Yeah, it's real easy to point a finger and be like, well, you should just know. But it doesn't translate that way in real life. We get it, right? Glass houses and all that.
Question from Scott: is there anything we can do as individuals or a security field for these maybe potentially under-resourced organizations? Talking, back to the wastewater kind of facilities and those folks.
That's a really interesting question, because I think if you're not in that industry, you're sort of the outside pressure, right? I mean, I think there's been a lot of efforts. If you even look at some of the industry level and community level, groups and things like the whole, Josh Corman, and it started up the whole, like, we are the cavalry, right? All these things that are attempting to sort of highlight and raise awareness that these critical areas of the environment are potentially at risk. I think that's one aspect, and I encourage everybody to become a part of those as you see fit. But I think that's already starting to take place. In fact, if you look at the recent, still in draft, I think till the end of this month, so steer me if I'm wrong on this one, but the CISA definition of critical infrastructure and reporting and, factors around, things like breach reporting and so forth in those environments. I mean, this squarely falls in it, right? I mean, this is going to be water. This is going to be power. This is going to be, nuclear. It's going to be all those kinds of things. And I think it's going to sort of drive industry wide this self-reporting factor, number one. But I think it's also going to place a community level or peripheral level of sort of, pressure feels like a strong word, but emphasis might be a better one around, these environments becoming better secured all the way around, right? Threat intel all the way around. I think it's going to get better as a result of those efforts.
I'd also say I can't speak to other states. So in your state, see what is available to you. In Michigan, there's something called the MIC3, which is a cyber civilian corps. I was one of the founding members of that. I've since stepped away, but it's a great body. And what you effectively do is you volunteer your time, and they partner you up with local agencies, local water, local municipalities who need help and need support. So there may be something like the MIC3 in your area that's worth investigating.
Awesome. Yeah, great message there too.
Yeah.
All right. 5 or so minutes left. Let's hit this last one if that works for you guys. Dave, this is an interesting one, I think. And I know you had some interesting thoughts when we asked you for the exec comms. You did too, Wolf. But my question, and feel free to start elsewhere, but why? Maybe tell us what happened here. But my question is the threat actor side. What are they doing? What was the goal here? But yeah, tell us a little bit what happened here. I guess maybe start there.
Yeah, so I'll give a real brief intro as to like what happened, and then I think we really want to hit the question you just asked, Dan, which is why. Okay, so look, in 2023, so there's a group called Lumen Technologies. They found a new strain of malware. They called it, I think, Chalubo, that apparently was responsible for this massive scale. I mean, really, it's a significant level of scale. That affected, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these devices that were small office, home office routing infrastructure. And they were kind of within one particular geographic environment in the United States, particularly the Midwest. And so this was like a 3 day thing, right? It was a siege that went on in late October in 2023. And it, basically bricked these things, made them permanently inoperable. People had to get their hardware replaced as a result of it. And what's fascinating is that, first off, the fact that this was never really even brought to light before. I mean, like the fact that we didn't hear about this in the industry as a larger story is a little bit just head scratcher in its own right. But the bigger question, I think, is what was their aim, right? What was the goal of the attackers? Because what they effectively did was just shut down these remote users in these small offices versus probably trying to take advantage of them. At least we haven't heard about any additional type of malware actions that took effect or impacted these organizations and end users thereafter. So my question is back to why? I don't know. Right. Wolf, what's your thought here?
I think they probably just didn't have a good hacker name. Like we had Shiny Hunters at the first one, Cyber Avengers for the OT one. I think if these guys had better branding, we would have heard of them. That's my takeaway. No, there's a couple schools of thought, right? Like one, maybe this was just an accident or someone being curious. Or two, maybe this was an attempt to push out some malware that failed, right? Maybe this was a small test run. Um, I don't know that we know or can answer, but I do think it really highlights the need, especially for your privileged users, especially for the people who are, if compromised, will lead to major impacts in the organization, to be engaged, if not actively providing home network equipment to those folks, right? Because if this had been a set of infected routers, we know for a fact that they would have been able to get a lot of data off those routers.
Yeah. So, and you just hit a soapbox of mine for sure. And at the risk of getting on said soapbox, I'll just say at the beginning of the pandemic, many things in the world changed, and a lot of organizations were put into a really untenable position of telling employees with either little or no tech experience to just go out to their local Best Buy or somewhere else and purchase a thing that facilitated remote access. Because that's the only way you're going to get your job done. And there was no standardization around a lot of this. People didn't have equipment to ship. And so you've got a real mishmash of equipment across many organizations as a result of not just that. I mean, I think that's been going on for a long time. This is one of the big blind spots, I think. What are people connecting to from home, or connecting with and through from home is a better way of putting that. And most IT organizations and certainly security teams don't know. This isn't an inventory. This isn't part of your, ITSM initiative. This is nowhere in your CMDB, and people are running, Netgear, or the old, Linksys Cisco stuff with like default credentials and things, and they have no impetus to change that. I think I think you're dead on, Wolf. I think this was a test run. That's what I think this was. I think it was a test run. Maybe they didn't write the malware well. They were trying to do some firmware overwrites and stuff apparently, but I don't think the intention was to brick those devices. I think that was just, sort of an after effect. I think organizations out there need to look at this as a warning sign. And if you haven't started going down the road of inventorying and really tracking what people are using to connect to and through everything, there's no better time than now.
Right on. Well, if you want to close this out, final 30 seconds, 1 minute.
So I think we nailed it. There was a question about law enforcement removing malware. I mean, the VPN filter malware that happened a few years ago is a good example of that. This can get very bad very quick. And just like you have a BYOD program for personal devices, it's probably a good time to start investigating, have a similar program for your staff's home routers.
Right on. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, Dave and Wolf, thanks as always. Really appreciate the time today. Thanks all the folks who hopped on. A lot of good questions today. A lot of interesting stories. We'll do it again soon. Dave and Wolf, I'm sure you guys are on the docket coming up next few weeks, so looking forward to that. And everyone take care. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, fellas.